I'm Chris McDonough, a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Aloha, everybody. Welcome to the interview room tonight, this Sunday evening. So grateful that you're here. I want to start this show tonight with a little upbeat, because we're going to get into a pretty heavy subject. Probably one of the saddest cases in this country, outside of some of the other children. We have two beautiful children. That needs resolution. This case needs resolution. For these sweet parents and grandparents and friends and family and community. And we're talking about Abby and Libby tonight. So I selected this song, It'll Be All Right, to give us each hope as we go over the tough information that I think we all read in the recent affidavit. So tell us where you're from, and let's listen to this song for a minute. Weigh in on the chat. Thank you for being here, all of our mods, Miss Sophia, Sophie Herb, Maui Girl, Teresa Mulligan, and Mimi J2. We love you guys. We love our members, we love our subscribers, and of course our Patreon members. We're so grateful for each and every one of you. So let's weigh in. Tell me where you're at tonight on this Sunday.
How much longer will you suffer in this life? But don't give up. Just hold on tight. It'll be alright.
So grateful to each and every one of you. Never say it enough.
Don't give up. Just hold on tight. It'll be alright.
Isn't this a beautiful song? It'll be all right. Don't we need that sometimes? I know I do. So grateful each and every one of you are here this evening. I really am. Wow. We have a heavy subject, like I mentioned. Tonight we're going to break down the Ronald Logan warrant. And we're going to do it together as always here on TIR. We do things as a community here. We're so grateful to each and every one of you who have become members of this beautiful community. Justice needs to be had for these two sweet, innocent souls. And we need to figure out what exactly this latest revelation meant. Did it impact the investigation? Was it intentionally leaked by somebody who wants more? Is it a piece of the puzzle that I'll call the elephant in the living room? Which one is it, right? I don't think we know yet, but I'm going to break it down to you tonight. So we're going to give you a couple of warnings right up front, as I always do. Please keep our chat classy. We've got, as you know, the most amazing mods. They're just great, great people. And they work very, very hard behind the scenes as well as in front of the scenes all week to get us here. So please be respectful to them. Be respectful to each other. We need more of that, don't we? We don't. We need more. So we get this revelation that there was a affidavit that was released on a Mr. Ronald Logan. Well, let's just talk about, the ground rules tonight, right? Let's talk about the ground rules real fast. Number one, you guys know I don't, I like to keep it, straightforward, and just stick to the facts of what we may or may not know. Tonight I'm going to go over some pretty sensitive stuff. We're going to talk about staging. We're going to talk about disorganization in criminal behavior. We're going to talk about what exactly that affidavit meant, why the FBI is the one who filed the affidavit versus the Michigan or Indiana State Police, excuse me. What does all that mean when you have such a high profile like this? And once they've done that, now where does it go? Are they talking to the perpetrator? They were 5 months ago through the public, which is a tactic, obviously, in any type of high-profile criminal investigation. We want to welcome all of you folks who are new to our channel or new subscribers. Thank you so much for being here and trusting us, all the lab rats who've come over. I'm going to be on Josh's channel after this, so catch me over there as well when we're done. This case has so many moving parts. It's just got so many different dynamics because the suspect in this particular incident has, I think, adapted quite efficiently. It's almost like, other people that we know in other cases, Summer's case, where we see adaptation in relationship to behavior. I'm proud to have been part of many, many cases, still am. We're making great progress in Michigan, by the way, on D. Warner's case, and Billy's coming on in a couple of weeks. We're going to bring you guys up to speed on that. There are some really, really interesting dynamics that we've uncovered and have brought them, of course, immediately to the attention of law enforcement. But, it seems like sometimes when these cases are moving so quickly, and with the advent now of social media, with the advent of, the ability to send information in bits and bytes, sometimes investigators get caught thinking in bits and bytes, and they don't necessarily always look at the big picture because there's not this slowing down in its perception. And that's what I have been teaching for many, many years in the Cold Case Foundation, is criminal investigative analysis. CIA is what we call it. And what I'm going to do is break down some of the fundamentals of CIA, or, CBA, it's criminal behavior analysis, depends on how you look at it. I am not a doctor. I am only trained in deviant behavior in relationship to these types of cases, children. I've spent, the majority of my career when I spent 13 years in homicide, the majority of my career, and then post-retirement as part of the Cold Case Foundation, and I am currently involved in a variety of other situations where I've lectured on the college, the university level, and other things. And my bio is in the, at the top of the page on my YouTube page. So we'll just kind of leave that there. But what I'm going to talk about tonight are some pretty serious, some serious information here that came out, and I think it was Murder Sheet, an amazing podcast, blasted it. I listened to that. I've listened to all of the podcast about this particular case. And, when we see this type of information coming to the surface, we have to understand some of the fundamentals. So what I'm going to give you tonight, as those of you who know me, I'm going to give you a clarity of focus in relationship to what are the fundamentals about this particular tragedy here, and talk about a little bit of what the suspect sees, what the investigators see, but without going over the line and tipping off a possible suspect. It's interesting to note that just before Ted Bundy died, he gave a variety of interviews, and most of them were with the BAU, the Behavior Science Unit, at the FBI. Somebody saying my volume is really low. How's that? Is this better? Honey, hush. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. I got to get closer to the mic. Anyway, he gave a whole series of interviews, and some of the last interviews that he gave, he talked about, getting into the mind, his mind, as well as in the mind of Ridgway, Gary Ridgway, who was the Green River Killer up in Washington State. Now, this is fascinating because the BAU went to him. They went to Bundy, and Bundy gave them strategically ideas on how they're going to catch this guy, right down to the point where Ted Bundy was suggesting, do certain things a certain way, and you will find him in these certain environments. And by golly, if he wasn't right on target. And eventually, obviously, Ridgway was captured. And those of you who know Larry Simon, who I had on here a couple of weeks ago, Larry is out interviewing guys and gals in the new 21st century digital age in relationship to deviance. And I'll call it SDA. So you guys can figure out the acronym, but I have to be careful here on YouTube. So I always want to, adhere to the YouTube guidelines. But so Larry's out there doing it. And there also Ann Burgess from, who's retired from the BAU, who's written many, many books, and Coop, and, who's our executive director here at the Cold Case Foundation. There is a lot of research going on now in relationship to the adaptation on how these guys are thinking. And 99% of them are men, so I'm going to say guys. And how they're adapting and to this digital age. And how they're, figuring out, what they could do. And I mean, and a lot of this came from the research that was done with Bundy while he was in custody, because they were able to sit down with him and really get into his mind. And then he shared so much information that today, the information that he shared has been applied in current, criminal investigative analysis, because he was like the guy who knew how to kill people, one of them. And, he was an organized offender, and he was very articulate, and he was able to guide investigators through the research of the FBI at the time. And then that was trickled down to Mary Ellen O'Toole from the BAU, who ran it for quite some time. And then it was trickled down to regional levels, and then ultimately local levels. And I had the opportunity years ago to be trained on the regional levels, so it was train the trainer. So I became a teacher of these principles, and I'm into it now, even today, teaching some of the homicide task forces, for the Native American indigenous people. Approximately 2,500 women have been murdered or disappeared. And that's just in the United States. There's almost 5,000 in Canada. So it's an amazing opportunity to listen to these guys and then learn from them. Ted Bundy shared one thought one time where he said, I would go back to the crime scenes after watching the news and adapt the crime scene away from what I heard on the news. Now, that's an amazing thought process from a very sadistic psychopath. So what do we have here in the Ronald Logan warrant, from my perspective? Well, first of all, we have to start in basics, right? One of the first things that any good investigations and investigators want to do is they realize the most important part of the entire investigation, when you have bodies laying out in the open, is the crime scene, i.e., the geographical information relating to that crime scene. Because that will tell you a variety of things. It will tell you the familiarity of the suspect to that environment. It will also help you understand confidence levels of the suspect. Gary Ridgway used to stack his victims in groups of 3 to 4, and then he would move. So it's pretty interesting how, these guys adapt and improvise in relationship to what they see on the media. And today, when we talk about the media, we're talking about things that are just on steroids. Everything. Social media. I mean, you come onto social media and you say something, even though it's not true, it becomes believable pretty quickly. And there's no way of getting around it because people just believe it. And so these guys adapt and improvise to that. And so what we do know is on February 13th, 2017, the girls were taken at 1 p.m. to the bridge, and they had a pickup time of 3 p.m. The last ping on their phone was 5:30 p.m. So they did not show up, obviously, for their pickup, their sister. And at 5:30 p.m., the records show that's when the last phone pinged. On the 14th, and out of respect for the family and out of respect for these sweet children, I'm just going to use their first initials, right? Libby and Abby. But I'm going to call them LG and AW. Okay? And I because I understand the pain and the suffering of these children. On the 14th, at 12:17, they were found and discovered deceased. The latest information showed the longitude and the latitude in relationship to where they were discovered. This is critical because, again, the first step in any investigation is that crime scene now becomes extremely, extremely important. The outdoor crime scene and the processing of that crime scene. You cannot underestimate the experience level of the folks that you need to put into that environment the day they were found. Quickly. Now, what's interesting about this warrant is the FBI agent who writes the affidavit says, and comes out and says it, they were victims of murder. And then they cite the Indiana Code 35-42-1-1, which is the penal code section for homicide in Indiana. We also learn that they develop a suspect or a person of interest. But what's interesting is in this affidavit, they actually come out and say, we're suspecting him of taking the girls' lives. Now, this is early on in the investigation. Okay, so let's think about that. We have a white male adult. He's wearing a blue jacket, wearing a cap. This is all not new news. Blue jeans. However, he's captured in a 43-second video on LG's phone, on Libby's phone. We hear his voice. It was first down the hill and then guys down the hill. Now, why is this significant? Because he is building trust initially on contact, yet controlling contact. And we've only seen a couple of seconds of that 43 seconds, I would submit. There's more. I'm sure this child has more. And as a result of that, they felt comfortable immediately releasing this information to the public. So on the 15th, images of the suspect or person of interest, POI there, was released. So the analysis after they did the cell phone analysis was there was a presumption that LG and that Libby and Abby made contact with the suspect. Now, what that means at this point, I don't think anybody knows. These are one of the investigative pieces of the puzzle that they're going to hold close to their chest, because only the suspect's going to know what those answers are. However, in this case, they started looking pretty hard at, who's in the geographic region. And this is the famous guys down the hill. We have that audio. But here they start looking quickly at Mr. Ronald Logan, who is now deceased. So in this affidavit, the FBI agent has to lay out probable cause to search Mr. Logan's property and or belongings. So in this affidavit, we learn what's the manner of death. There were wounds from an unknown weapon, but there was extensive blood loss. Well, in order for that to have occurred, remember that there is a high probability that the attack was a blitzkrieg, probably from the waist up. We probably will discover down the road that there was some arterial bleeding pretty quickly. And that's a control mechanism, obviously, and it could also have been a panic mechanism on the suspect, because it could indicate that the suspect wanted control quickly. And the investigator puts that at the crime scene there was extensive blood loss in this particular situation. Then she does what we call a suspectology. She starts laying out in this affidavit that the voice of Mr. Ronald Logan is not inconsistent with the voice on the tape. She doesn't say it's him. She's saying it's not inconsistent. So there would have to have been a voice analysis at some point sent to the lab to figure out if there is consistency there. And if you haven't seen what we did on the Maya Miliete case, go back and see the lab that we used to show what those gunshots sounded like. Those are the same people that would do it. How does one person control two healthy females? That is a great question, and we'll get into that. But absolutely, it's not very difficult, Cecilia, excuse me. Because these are children. And he's going to quickly control them. And I think the blood loss is an indication of that. Now, at the time they were looking at him, he was a white male adult, age 77, and he had a consistent physical build, but his arrest record was pretty low key. He was on probation, DUI, that type of stuff. However, he knew the area. He had been interviewed multiple times. But one of the most interesting things was the victims were found 1,400 feet from his residence. Now, for me, I want to know, were the bodies positioned towards the residence or away from the residence? Was this point of contact, the POC, on the bridge, was he guiding them down towards the residence? And then it all went sideways. Did the girls start to resist? And that's why we now have a blitzkrieg type of event. Now, what the other thing I think is going to be, thank you, Kathy. The other thing I think is going to be extremely important to pay attention to is these statements. He cares for large animals. Okay. That should, Cecilia, help you understand control. Okay. What the investigators, in my opinion, were trying to do and was tie his ability to control both of these girls by tying it to the fact that he cares for large farm animals. So they were trying to do a suspectology in relationship to correlation to those two behaviors. And that's, I think, what was, in just my opinion, of what was going on when this affidavit was initially written. So at the crime scene, what do we learn? Well, first of all, it was on his property. And we know now that according to this affidavit, there was a heavy blood loss. The investigator felt that there was a transfer of blood onto the suspect's clothing. Now, I'm not really sure about that because I've experienced, some horrific crime scenes. And if there is a transfer, it's usually from cast off from a sharp instrument. Sometimes the suspect, if they're attacking from the front, they could get some transfer, but it doesn't necessarily mean they are going to. And I can use, examples of, where the knife, a knife, for an example, I had a case where the suspect put the knife in his pocket, and we had the victim's blood inside of his pocket from the transfer of the knife, but we had nothing on his clothing and or, that area. And typically, you would have the most common place you would see it would be near the shoes, because of a variety of reasons. One, the suspect gets lazy after the attack, and if it's an SA type of situation, they have, now they have to shift into a refocus for their SA gratification and their deviance. If they have these, fetishes or anything, bizarre, they have to immediately shift. And so that's when they make mistakes. So we see a transfer of blood onto suspect's clothing in this affidavit, according to the investigator, because they're surmising there was so much, it was such a disgruntled crime scene, the suspect must have had something on them. Well, I don't know. I think that's a 50-50, in my opinion. Missing clothing, I think I understand that. I don't know what the item is, but it's only missing from one of them. And that is a way of, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute in the next couple of slides. So I won't necessarily go into that just yet. They were possibly moved. With possibly staging. So what we're seeing here is a pattern of this investigator laying out, we could have a deviant psychopath. However, there's no signs of struggle. There are no signs of struggle according to that affidavit. Okay. And Maven, I saw your question go by here about even with arterial bleeding. Mystery, yes. Even with arterial bleeding, you can. I've had personal cases that it was a mess, but there was nothing on the suspect because he had positioned himself correctly behind the victim and bled them out. Now this last piece here, it has, I think you guys are going to see something at the end that I think everybody's going to be like, okay, the elephant in the living room. And actually, I called it the elephant in the living room. Hairs and fibers, right? So let's talk strategy and motive. So how did they determine motive in this particular case? Or do they actually know there is a motive? And I would also submit to you that the struggle in of itself, that these two girls just did not say, we give. But there could have been such a blitzkrieg of attack and intimidation that fear takes over. But we don't know this, so I'm not going to speculate on that, but I would submit to you that just because it said the affidavit says there wasn't a sign of struggle doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't. Because it's never what it appears, ever. So the motivations behind the acts of a madman possess their own logic. The psychotic murder does not act wholly irrational. Now think about this. There is a method to his madness. There is logic, a rationale hidden behind what he does and how he does it. However wildly bizarre and completely without reason it appears to be. So one of the principles in CIA is understanding this idea about motive. And so it becomes an investigative challenge to discover this perverse and seemingly irrational logic and then apply that information to the case. And this is why it is so important. It's so important to process that crime scene immediately and correctly and with a lot of time, with understanding, the dynamics of what that time meant, not only to the investigators while there, but to the suspect while committing the horrific crimes. Because this is what this individual is reflecting upon again as they leave the crime scene. Remember that some folks will come back and readjust. So it's important to understand some of the principles now of behavior analysis. One of them is, at this point, we have to submit a very large and lengthy victimology. And then you want to understand that from that victim risk continuum. Environment, situation, circumstance, low, medium, high risk. Now, if this is a situation involving the internet, that moves this into the higher risk category. If it's just staying on the low risk side, i.e., this gentleman tells the authorities that he was familiar with the girls from the community, well, then what we want to start looking at is looking into what's the offender, what does that individual look like? Right? Well, is this an organized or disorganized homicide? Some folks would submit that this is an organized homicide. That this thing was down by the numbers. He could have lured them there. Well, it could have organizational appearance, but it could also be a very disorganized situation. Was he taking them, hypothetically, towards the house as an organized, opportunity? And now he's got these two kids held. Or is it spontaneous? Does this event just kind of go off and it gets crazy quickly? So we have to understand the offender in a disorganized situation. Typically, they're below average intelligence. They're socially inadequate. They just don't fit. They hide behind facades. This is the secret life. Remember, we live 3 lives: our public, our private, and our secret life. This is where the disorganized offender lives, in that secret life. Unskilled worker, typically. Thank you. SA incompetent, i.e. just can't get along anymore. An organized offender is typically on the higher scale of the birth order when in a family environment, and a lot of times they're the first child. But a disorganized offender, believe it or not, is lower on that birth order because they usually have things given to them, so they don't have to figure it out. We typically see with these types of offenders that their father's work throughout their lives was very unstable. And that turned into very harsh discipline as children. They are anxious and they have a mood swing during the crime because they're not realizing the totality of, now I have to handle the second part of this, i.e., there's a lot going on around me. How do I control it? And so a disorganized offender will typically not use alcohol, whereas an organized offender usually has a lot of alcohol that will drop, that inhibition to attack. They have been shown to live alone, and they have minimal interest of media, but they will participate with the media. Whereas an organized offender will monitor the media. A serial killer, an organized serial killer, like BTK, Dennis Rader, or, Ted or Gary or any one of them, Jonathan, there is a whole bunch of attention paid to the media, because what they want to do is they want to remanipulate the fantasy. And so a lot of times they'll go back, as I mentioned earlier, and they'll readjust some of the things in the crime scene just to mess with the authorities. So this control mechanism for them is part of the media mechanism for them. But one of the other things that the investigators will typically see is a significant behavior change post-homicide. You will start seeing things like, oh, Suzanne, 14 seconds. That's a disorganized. But it becomes organized post-homicide, not pre-homicide. And so what do you see at the crime scene? You see that it's a spontaneous offense, i.e., it's not the way they thought it was going to go down. And a lot of times they think about this not pre, but while it's going on. They understand that the victim may know the location of where they're at, so this adds to the dynamic of potential witnesses. So you get a lot of depersonalization of that victim and overkill, which is also a signal of SA type of crime. There's not a lot of conversation that takes place with these types of cases. They're quick. And that's where you get a random and sloppy crime scene. Disorganized because of the sudden violence towards that victim. So, and by the way, I'll answer some of the questions as we go along, later as we get through this. But if you guys, me, if you could just kind of hang on, I would greatly appreciate it. I kind of get focused here, and I want to make sure that I'm giving accurate information for the family as well as the investigators or anybody who may be listening. So you see sudden violence towards the victims. And there is a minimal use of restraint. And so if this is an attack from the upper, from the neck up or from the chest up, that will assist in the control. Okay? And so they're in quickly. And there may be some SA post-death. Typically in a disorganized crime scene, the body is left in plain view because there's just too much to be thinking about in relationship to what do I do next. Sometimes you find the weapon at the scene, but not always. It's not always there. It's not present. And if it's a knife, there's a higher probability a knife was taken. Okay? If it's a gun, there's a high probability he took the gun. I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate which one it is. In a disorganized situation, we see that the bodies are typically left at the death scene. So let's talk about staging. Because in this affidavit, the FBI agent talked about staging. Staging a crime scene occurs when the offender purposely alters the crime scene to mislead the authorities and or redirect the investigation. In an organized crime scene, staging is highly utilized in SA sadistic homicides, where the suspect has not only fantasized out about what they're going to do, but they organize it on their behalf of how they're going to do it and when. And so they usually have murder kits. They literally pack a bag. Dennis Rader is a good example of that. He packed a bag. And then pre-incident, there are typically drawings where they lived the fantasy before the event. So staging is a conscious criminal action on the part of an offender to thwart an investigation. So the offender consciously makes a decision post-incident to throw the cops off or the authorities. And so it's important that everybody remember that things are not always what they appear to be. There could be indications of staging, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's connected to the totality of the crime and the behavioral thought process of the offender, of the psychopath. He could have moved the bodies to make it appear that it was a much more sophisticated offender. And the reason for that is to cover up, one, for the murder, and two, to redirect the investigation and or destroy evidence And that's why you see a lot of, not in this case, but you see a lot of arsons after a homicide. That is staging. Okay. And so the question for me is, are they moved closer to the house, or they move further away? And the investigators know that information, and they're going to hold it. And quite frankly, I would expect them to. And I'm not going to guess. Because that goes into the thought process in relationship to this offender. But what's interesting is they put the victims in a situation that brought the attention to the investigation in terms of, they're just not laying there. And posing and staging are simultaneous. They're connected to each other. There could have been, some digital photography, that type of stuff. We don't know yet. But what we do know, that the bodies appeared to be staged. We know missing clothing. My gut tells me what it is, and I think you guys have your own opinion. I'm not going to say, but my gut tells me what I think it is. We know with Logan's phone, the initial analysis indicated that it was likely outside in the proximity of where the victims were located. We also know that he lied to authorities based on the affidavit about his location and his alibi by his family, his nephew. We also know that an ex comes forward and she tells them that he was violent with her in the past while drinking. You see, that's where the alcohol now. In that particular circumstance, in a controlled circumstance, he loses control. And so you have this idea that he's an angry, mean drunk. But there's an old saying, within the first 30 witnesses and or interviews, there is your suspect. In this case, there were 15 tips in the case file that came in. About this guy. So this is interesting in of itself. So I think they were looking at him pretty hard and strong in the very beginning. So the last slide I have here is the elephant in the living room. And the voice analysis, comparisons and all of that, the investigators, have done an amazing job keeping it close. But in this search warrant, the purpose of it was to identify computers and forensics evidence. Connections to the victim. Bodily fluids. Weapons. Evidence of tokens and or trophies. You see, going down that lane up here, they're going down towards a serial problem. But here's the elephant in the living room. Animal hairs. In this search warrant, they mentioned they had they had hair and fibers. But in the body of the search warrant or the affidavit, we see specifically they're looking for animal hair. So that's the elephant in the living room. As I've said many times, some of the most important witnesses are never interviewed. And those are the dogs and or the animals. In this case, the good news is they're on it. And, you know, one of the things that you'd want to do pretty quickly in the beginning is get a botanist down there as well into that field and collect all of the plant species. And then you collect the air filter of any cars that have been in that environment. Because you can match those pollens with inside of that air filter, those air filters. In fact, it's been done many times. Many, many times. So that's the elephant in the living room. The animal hairs. It's interesting that they mentioned that he works with large animals. And now at the very end, they say they're looking for animal hair. Okay, so let's take a breather here. Let's do a little music again and tell me where you're at. You know me, that's heavy stuff. So tell me where you're at tonight, folks, and thank you for being here. We've got 2,500 folks here. I really appreciate you hitting that thumbs up if this is something that's helping you. It's helping me, and hopefully we can help the families as we continue to go forward together. All right, I see we've got a lot of folks in the house here. Michigan, Canada, Cookeville, Tennessee, Alabama. Thank you so much for being here. Dallas is in the house. Love our Texas people. Florida, love you guys. Oh, hi, my three sons, Mom. How are you? New Zealand, thank you so much for being here. I saw a video the other day on fishermen in New Zealand. It was awesome. Louisiana, Atlanta. Okay. Utah, Ohio, Connecticut, Australia. Hello, mate. Hi, Brown. Thank you so much. Beantown's in the house. Karen, Maryland, North Georgia, Left Coast, California. Okay. Yeah, how's the gas prices out there? Holy cow. Man, Virginia, Halifax, Nova Scotia. I've got relatives at PEI according to my genealogy. California, the Sunshine State. There you go. Ohio, Missouri, Nova Scotia. Love it. Absolutely love you guys. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much for being here. All right, so let's grab a couple of questions, guys. Go ahead and put some question up here. You've been hating on my channel. What do we got here? Let's see here. Chris, I've been heating on your channel with the garden now. Drop court, escape prisoner in Texas. Thank you so much, Aaron. It's okay. You know, you're awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Let's see here. If RO had been BG, I believe he would have asked his cousin to lie for him, including a time well before 3:15. You know, that's a really good point. Bee's knees. I love it. That is an interesting why he would have a family member lying for him, right? That is a very good point. Something in the warrant that struck me was that R.L. allegedly asked the family members to lie about his alibi before any crime had been discovered. There you go. Thank you, Mystery. A very wise attorney, by the way, folks. Mystery is amazing. Would he be drinking and walking all over that bridge? That is a interesting thought, Margaret. I don't know, if he's able to control his alcohol, but that is a good question. Let's see here. Obviously, they've executed and tested everything on this 5-year-old search warrant, and Logan was cleared 5 years ago. Yeah, probably. Yep, I didn't say he's the guy. I'm just reporting on the warrant. That came information because now they've redeveloped other information with these new characters. There's about 4 or 5 of them, actually, right? Was there no DNA? I don't know if we know if there's DNA. Why would he leave the bodies on his own property? That is a great question. But there's a higher probability that if he was moving them, then he didn't have time. He ran out of time. So let's see here. Yeah, everybody, he was cleared. Okay. I'm not saying he wasn't. He knew the bridge well. Okay. I'm just showing you that from my perspective of what we could be looking at here. In fact, the disorganization actually moves towards Klein versus anybody else in my head because it's not an organized situation. It could be a bait situation, but it's not necessarily an organized crime scene. It's actually dysfunctional. And then the secondary part of that is, some of the behaviors that take place post-mortem, i.e. the digital photography, maybe some of the, positionings of the body, that kind of stuff, and then taking some of the items from only one of the two. But typically those kind of problems don't necessarily happen from that kind of guy like Klein. Even though he's got, CP all over him and he's got all the markings of, a real creepy guy. These types of cases, it could have been, a rapidly progressive situation. And, he looks like, he's more interested in little problems versus big problems. And the fact that he copped out to most of the stuff, he's still in the ballpark. I'd keep him on the list. I'd keep Logan on the list. I wouldn't completely pull him off the list yet. But I'm not saying he's your guy. Did his phone ping near the murders? Yeah, according to this affidavit, his phone was in proximity. And maybe that's why he tried to distance himself with the nephew and the alibi. I don't know. Great question, though. Let's see here. Thanks, niece. Nobody in the right mind would leave them on their own property. The affidavit was exaggerated to get a search warrant for RL, which turned up nothing. Okay? The bodies were 1,400 feet from his house, correct, according to the affidavit. Indiana girl. I honestly don't think this case will be solved. We have one locally that hasn't been solved in 40 years. Well, let's hope that it can. So let's hope that it can get solved. Right? Cherry, any thoughts to Logan having had relationships with and being violent with women young enough to have baby and possibly murdering young girls? Not to my knowledge. I know that his ex came forward, as we all know, and threw him under the bus as having violent tendencies. I'm going more towards this was a situation that's the girls may have been lured down there, but in relationship to the social media aspect, we know obviously there was communication with Klein. But I'm not going to say that Klein is, obviously he looks nothing like the guy in the video or that we hear. But it doesn't mean he didn't have help. Are there two folks that they're looking at? Are they still talking to the suspect through social media and through the those types of things through the medium? Chris, do you think LE are behind all these leaks before all is revealed at Keegan's trial? I hope not, Shane. I hope not, brother. Because for them to be leaking the information is extremely dangerous. Because what obviously that would position a defense attorney to say, isn't it true that you guys, dropped all this stuff into the environment? And you never want to get up on the stand during a voir dire and, having a defense attorney, nail you on that stuff because you're a goner. Your credibility, everything sinks. And Aaron, no, don't worry. I'm sorry, Aaron. You're fine. We love you. Thank you. You're awesome, and don't worry about the typo. We're good. We're good. I love it. Thank you so much. You guys are so kind. Let's see here. This one here is really good. Layla, where are there animal hairs where there is a lot of blood loss? It could be on the clothing of the victims. It could be transfer, obviously, from the suspect to the victims, from one piece of clothing to the next. There's a whole bunch of things that obviously you would want to do pretty quickly, and you'd want to recover that stuff at the ME's office and then send it packaged and wrapped to the lab. The fact that they were looking for animal hair tells us something. It tells us something, right? I think that's the elephant in the living room here. As I mentioned to Frances about finding Brian. I told her as we sat down and talked, and you guys know the result of that, by the way. They've charged somebody with his murder. Chris, I'm sorry, have you linked this to Klein's involvement? No, I'm not saying that yet. I'm saying, he should stay on the list. Not necessarily the guy, but, the fact that he's having, communication with younger girls, that's problematic in of itself. But his father could be interesting. That's for sure. Getting back to the animal hair, the fact that they're looking for that tells us something. Okay? Tells us something. let's see here. Lance asks, what drives someone to kill without induced trauma? Is it because they're lost? Lance, that is a very complex question. From my experience, depending outside of, gang activity, right, where, that's all driven by, neighborhoods and that kind of stuff, but just random attacks, if it's children, it's typically driven by SA. And within the first 3 hours, those victims are taken and their lives are taken. There are rare events where they will be captured and held for quite some time. And maybe this is one of those situations where the suspect or the perpetrator was hoping they could get into a scenario where they could, capture these two sweet souls. But I surmise that one of them, or if not both of them, fought, and that created the blitzkrieg. There had to be something that created all of that blood loss, and my experience has shown me or taught me, as well as others, that there's a problem up top, i.e. the neck and arterial and that kind of problem. I don't want to be too graphic here out of respect for the families. Predatorial behavior. Has Klein moved to another level, and is this, his place? I don't know. There's that other guy who would fit in my head more closely to the dynamics of this particular problem. I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head. I'm going to have to ask somebody to put. There are like 4 or 5 guys on this, and I've been so busy in Dee's case too. Klein's friend, yeah, maybe. Is it Chadwell? Yeah, Shane. I mean, you could be right on target. Yeah. Now that guy who was he's the guy holding the little girl, right? If I remember right. Now that guy is interesting. Now, he would be a sadistic, psychopath. Or was it Keegan? Well, anyway, you guys know who this guy is. Okay, I'm going to have to look him back up, to be honest with you, because it's been a while since I studied him. Yeah, in the basement. Right, he was holding that little girl. Okay. That guy fits, a little closer in my thought process as the type of personality, from a predatorial type, right? Chadwell. Okay. So, I'm going to go back and look at him a little bit harder. I'm going to take a harder look at that guy because, I think this guy, in the beginning was a good possible, but I'm not going to put a bingo card on him, tonight. I'm in a, James Chadwell. That's him. That's the guy. Thanks, Steph. And yeah. That guy, when we all go back and look at him, he's dangerous. Void, he's past feeling. And his victimology was in the range of what we've got going on there in Delphi. So let's see here. Yeah, what do you got here? Polka dots, love it. Thank you. Chadwell does fit the profile better than RL. I agree. He's in prison for 90 years, Meredith. Well, thank the legislators in Indiana. Way to go. Nick says, Chadwell seems to be hungry for the kill for sure. Interesting. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. Sergeant Buddha, question. Garrett Kurtz, question mark. Are you like this? You like this guy? Sarge? Interesting. Well, this is a complicated situation still, and we know for a fact that I think the takeaway of this whole search warrant affidavit was the animal hair. The forensics evidence, there was obvious forensics evidence that they were looking for. But that elephant in that living room, quite frankly, was the fact that they were looking for something to do a comparative analysis. Remember, at the crime scene, you only get one shot at it. And so you've got to process this thing so slowly and methodical. And some of the best, most efficient human beings that I've met, and I can go list them, one of the, Cheryl Tyner, who was one of the, in my opinion, one of the best CSIs, Michelle Morgan's. I work with these women for quite some time, and we did a lot of stuff. But they are so smart and so meticulous. And these are the kind of crimes where you just don't have somebody come in with no experience to process a crime scene, because it'll bite you in the butt later on. So I'm suspecting they had the A-team, if not the FBI evidence response team. It'd be interesting. Shane, Ellie took the Chadwell and Klein's dog. Nice, good mate, good one. Okay, has to be canine hair. Interesting. Okay. So that's the elephant in the living room, mate, right there. How about that? So that is interesting. I did not know that they took their dogs. So you've got some type of transfer. You've got some type of transfer there. Very interesting. Very interesting. See, that was one of those things in that warrant I think a lot of people overlooked, was, what that was going to be. Now, I said that years ago on a case that I had, believe it or not. Could also be from a search dog, Steph says. Okay. Interesting. So the suggestion is that the search dog got close to the victims and could have cross-contaminated. Very interesting. And yeah, she agrees. Very interesting. Yes, the whole dog. That's hysterical. Well, not half the dog, where the wind blows. The whole dog. I hope they took the whole dog, not half the dog. Logan was involved with cattle. There you go, Margaret. Thank you for sharing that. This case is heavy. No question about it, Maria. I cannot disagree with that a million at all. And that's why I've kind of stayed, off to the side. There have been so many other YouTube creators, with just minutia details that they've been reporting on it much more successfully than me. I'm looking at it from a behavioral analysis aspect. Do I think one man could do this? The answer is yes, Joy. Do I think two people? The answer is yes. That it's much more convenient to have two than just one. And that's where the first attack and potentially the blitzkrieg, i.e. the overkill, comes in to the victims, because it could have been just one person. I think Betty should weigh in on the dog issue. I agree. Where is that guy? I got to find that suspect. He's around the camper here. It's somewhere. He's usually sleeping right behind me, but he's not there right now. So, yeah, I think one person could do it. And if you look at the guy on the bridge, if he is the suspect, which they, I think the authorities are sticking, with that guy, that, he's got the right size. He could control both of the girls, especially even if, depending on the weapon, if he had, if he had a gun, that's a no-brainer. He's got both of them controlled automatically. But then if we go look at Wesley Dodd, for an example, right? Remember in the interviews I did with him, he immediately controlled, two boys quickly. And so that's the kind of thing that, could happen. And it does happen. I don't think they've released the time of death. Let's see here. Two people makes the two sketches make more sense, potentially. Yep. Thank you. These are all good comments and good statements, guys. I absolutely love it. Still a mystery how Logan died. No one is talking about that. Suicide, because that implies guilt. Thank you, Meredith. Yeah. Maligator. The mayor at the time needs to be looked into more. Okay. I love the name. Dodd's case happened where you are, Katie. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm grateful that he's gone, though. He was a sick puppy. That's for sure. Absolutely sick puppy. Logan died of COVID, is what people are saying here. Okay, Niece, thank you so much for being here. I think Chadwell is the main suspect. He has a tattoo on his arm of one of the girls, Robert. I remember reading about that. Yep. Okay, so you want to lighten this up a little? Maybe play another song, and then we'll... I've been here an hour and a half, so I don't want to hold you guys up too much longer. I'm going to be over on Josh's channel tonight after this, and we can pick up the conversation over there. But, hey, I got a really cool show, couple of cool shows coming for you. Next week, I've got Manny Villareal coming, and he trains all of the dogs for law enforcement pretty much in the south part of Southern California. I wanted him to come in here to talk about, canines and cadaver dogs and just dope dogs and attack dogs. The guy is absolutely amazing. And then we're going to have, after Manny, and Manny and I have been friends for close to 35 years. He was the guy who actually trained my old canine, Irk the Jerk. And Manny's going to come in and talk about, how it's looking out there today. And then we've also have Billy coming back. We've got an update coming. And let me tell you something. We've made progress. We have made a lot of progress. Okay. Bob says hi, sends his love to everybody. He was really grateful that folks that came to listen to his show. He didn't think he was going to get anybody here, and I was like, no, don't worry. These people love you. They'll love you. Trust me. And you did. You showed some love to him, and there's a lot moving. There's a lot of moving parts. Frances Gaines is getting some justice for her sweet little boy, Brian McKenzie. And as I mentioned earlier, I told her earlier on, stay focused on that car. If we find that car, we'll find Brian. And sure enough, that fisherman found that car, and sure enough, we found Brian. And now the suspect who's done that is going on trial, who shot him and killed him. He's going to be charged, or he actually already is charged, and he's going on trial in Tennessee. So it's been fun helping that family behind the scenes, as well as Maya Miliete. Give you an update on Maya. You know, Larry's still as nutty as a fruitcake. They got him locked up, and can you believe this? His parents are suing the family, are suing Maya's family. Larry's parents are suing Maya's family. I mean, does it get any nuttier than that? Good grief. Okay? Good grief. Unreal. And we've got so many good things happening around us, and I just absolutely love the fact that you guys are so kind to each other, and that hopefully we can be a kinder world for our children and our grandchildren going forward. I think if we teach more love versus more hate, things will shift in the right focus. So, are you guys ready to go to Hawaii? I always want to thank you for being here. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you and to our mods. You know, God bless you. Have a good night. I'll see you over at Josh's. Aloha, and see you on the next one. Mahalo.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii.